We're going to present a new SSRS analytical reporting tool for review and beta testing. The current Crew P&L, which we can run several different versions, such as the 12-month trailing, which is a typical one, as well as a month-to-month comparison report. So here's an example of a month-to-date cruise side by side for Sammy Christian for a particular period, 2017-04. On this Crew P&L, there's going to be some key metrics. So we want to not just analyze, but also compare crew to crew, and possibly also compare period to period. I've gone ahead and run the Crew P&L for Eric Graham, which is under Sammy. So we did the Crew version, and I exported it to Excel just to kind of illustrate some things. And I'm going to go ahead and hide some columns here for discussion purposes. And if we take a look at the Crew P&L, we're basically talking about some key metrics that are either going to be amounts, such as revenue, direct margin, operating margin, percentages of cost, for example, or margin to revenue or something else. Ratios of amounts to operating man hours, and it could be something else also, direct man hours. We're going to start off with some key metrics, but we may add some in the future. So if we take a look at this Crew P&L, this is for the period 2017-04, we have our direct man hours and our operating man hours, overhead man hours. These are the indirect hours to come up with a total for the operating man hours for this period for this crew. And we can see we have revenue. And right away, we have some ratios of revenue to operating man hours. That's dollars to operating man hours. We have a direct margin calculation and all the detail behind it, all the detail cost, and we have the same ratio. But we're going to look at this, let's call this one a key metric, direct margin. And we have the percentage of revenue as well as the margin dollars per operating man hour. If we scroll down a little bit, we have the operating margin, which is your direct margin with minus the crew indirect cost, non-project charge cost. And again, we have the ratio to operating man hours, and we have an operating margin percent on this report. Similarly, we've run the comparative report. So here's the report for Sammy Christian with all his crews side by side with a total that should come up to the region P&L total, and we'll proof that out later. But we've gone ahead. So let's take a look at the comparative version of the Crew P&L. And we ran this for Sammy Christian, all his crews side by side. Went ahead and dumped this out to Excel. So if we go out and we go find this test crew 0101, we can see that we have this crew is one of many, and it totals up to what would be on the regional P&L, and we can proof that out. So if we highlight this, we can say, well, we got our revenue 115 and our direct margin of 57, and that should tie back with what we're seeing on the Crew P&L, 115, and our direct margin of 57. So let's go back to the comparative report. Now this report's nice. If we can do the comparisons by crew at the metric level, as well as all the details behind those metrics. But what if we want to do a quick analysis of just each metrics for each crew and be able to, for example, sort from low to high? You know, crews with the lowest amount of revenue to crews with the highest amount of revenue, for example. What if we want to highlight when a metric is below a certain amount, such as direct margin or operating margin percent? We can do that through Excel, but we probably want an easier way, quicker way to do that. What if we want to detect when revenue or margin per operating man hour is below a certain target? Can we do that? And from the report, be able to drill down to the crew details of revenue by project for the period. Let's say we have a situation with low revenue or even negative revenue. We'd probably want to look at the details. What makes that up? Is it one project? Is it multiple projects? And we want to see the details behind it. We look at margin. Okay, well, what is the cost details that make up margin, or the indirect cost, for example? So let's review this pending report slash tool that we've called Crew Comparative Analytics. And we have that up on our menu here. So we'll dive into this. So under the Crew P&L folder, we have another subfolder called Comparative Analytics. And the report we're going to review today is called Crew Comparative Analytics. So let's click on that and kind of step through the typical features of this. And as in all the reports, we need to choose our company that we're going to run the report for. And for purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to use our last closed fiscal period. And I'm going to stick with Sammy Christian, the 08 Regional Manager, for this illustration. Okay. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we have some key metrics. So let's kind of review them again, or look at the ones we're focusing on this report, and we may add others in the future once we see how the mechanics of this report works. So like we saw in our Crew P&L, we have these metrics: revenue amount, it's a dollar amount; direct margin amount, a dollar amount; direct margin percent; a ratio, revenue per operating man hour; operating margin amount, operating margin per operating man hour; and operating margin percent. So let's just start with revenue. Now we can view up to 12 periods, and the default is 3. If I just want to see one period, I just pick one, but let's stick with the default there. Okay. And before we illustrate these other options here, let's just go and run this report. Okay, so if we take a look at this report, one of the things we can first point out is, our test crew is 0101 is Eric Graham, okay, and we see for the month of April that we have 115,834 in revenue. Well, that ties with his crew P&L, as it should. The other thing, as we showed before, we're showing 3 periods side by side. The blue highlights the current period that we're running the report for. If I wanted to run 6 periods, let's say, I just come over here, change it to 6, and rerun the report. Now, let's just go back to 3, keep it a little bit less noisy. And one of the options we have is we can highlight values below certain amounts. So let's just go to the last page, see if we have any examples, and yes, we do. So we have an amount of 0, and we have some cases where we have negative revenue. But suppose I want to see anything below, let's say, 30,000. So I'll just type in 30 in there. I'll refresh the report. Now our highlighted amounts increase because we've increased the threshold for highlighting. The other thing we can do is we can come over here, and there's an option I can just sort. I want to sort. I just want a quick sort of low to high. So I'm going to turn that option on. I'm going to view the report. And there we go. So we have our negative revenue amounts we saw earlier, and works its way up to the highest amount of revenue per crew for the period. The sorting is based upon this reporting period, which is 2017-04. So it's not sorting on any of the prior periods, it's not sorting on the total, it's sorting on the current period we are running the analytics for. One thing to point out is we have over here a total $5.6 million. And just to proof that out, I've run the crew P&L for the region. This is all the crews under the region. And if we can see over here, for the month of April, 5.6 is the revenue. And that's similar to the comparative report that does all the crews side by side. It comes back to the total $5.6 million. So this does tie out. Now, if we go back to the other page, if for some reason we don't want any highlighting, we can just come over here and click this null option, the highlight values below, and it will take away the highlighting. Okay, but we're going to turn it back on, and we'll put that back to 0. Do a quick refresh. Now, as I'm looking at these numbers, I say, okay, 61,000 negative revenue, or any number that I want to delve into, I could just highlight that row and column right here, and you see the point of the cursor turns to a little finger, and I'm clicking on that number, and it basically gives me the details behind that number. So over here, I have all of my revenue components, which tie to the negative 61. I can see that my biggest problem is this one particular project, energy, and this is all for one fiscal period. And as I work my way down, we can see this will take it all the way down to the direct margin by project as well as the total. And we'll show some of those on the other report summarized. Our man hours, then we come down here, our indirect costs, to get a calculation for total crew indirects as well as our operating margin, our percentage of revenue, and our ratio to operating man hours. So let's go back to the main report. Okay, and I'm going to take this sorting off really quick because I want to just use our example, the 101. So now this sorts by, of course, all region 8 because we're filtering for region 8 and crew number order. So again, if I want to drill down into 115, we see the bulk of the revenue is coming from one particular project with an allocation of accrued revenue, and the metrics for margin and indirect and the related operating margin ratios and percentages. So I'm going to switch. We'll go through some of the other options. We have direct margin amount. I can come over here and refresh, and I have these are direct margin dollars. And again, if I go to the last page, my 2.5 direct margin should tie with my 2.5. And also, I go back to the prior period, 2.2, come back to the analytics report, and there's my $2.2 million. So all this does reconcile with the crew P&Ls in detail at the crew level, as well as rolled up to the totals for the region in this example. So we also have direct margin percent. So here's one, if I want to, for example, filter on anything below, let's say I'll put in 35%, I would put 0.35, click on view the report, and anything below this criteria will be highlighted. And of course, I can always sort from low to high too, just like I can the amounts. Okay, I have revenue per operating man hour. And let's put this filter down to 0, back to where it was. And here we may have a target of, let's say, $80. And so anything below $80 would be highlighted. Operating margin amount. And I'm going to turn this off so I can focus on my sample crew. And 001, so the 43075. I'm going to turn this down to 0. And sort. And as you would imagine, you'd probably want to do some analysis on these. Have negative 15 of operating margin. Well, I'm starting off with revenue of 43.6, direct of 53, so I have negative direct margin, and then on top of that, my crew indirects, which is going to take me to my negative operating margin that we see here. Operating margin per operating man hour, again a ratio, and we could filter and whatever that should be. And operating margin percent. So let's say if our run rate for overhead is 20%, want to see anything below our break even, I could put in 0.20, view the report, and it's going to highlight anything that's underneath my operating margin. My break even point as far as covering overhead. Okay, I'm going to jump back to operating margin amount, do one final illustration, and like any SSRS report, I can come over here, dump this to Excel, and from there I can do some further analytics using standard Excel capabilities. So one of the things the report allows you to do when it's exported to Excel, if you're running it within an environment that's still attached to the SSRS, you can come over here and you can click and it'll quickly open up the sub-report right from the Excel sheet. And so in Excel, if I come over here and use my standard filtering technology, I can do sorting within here, as well as any kind of filtering I want to do with standard Excel filtering functionality. So that's an overview of the report. There's one additional feature that you can use if you happen to want to filter for a particular vice president's results. It's still going to be crew at the crew level, but if I come over here, for example, and I think I know one VP under Gary Whaley, I can view the report, and this would be just related to the crews under Gary Whaley for the period, the results under Gary Whaley. So you can see it's a much smaller list than if we just used the full unfiltered version for Gary Whaley. And we have a lot more rows. And just to illustrate the tie back, so for Gary Whaley, we'll use operating margin. We have 23,182 crew performance under this vice president. And to prove this out, the 23,182, if we come back to our crew P&L and let's just run it for a VP, it's going to be under Sammy, and we'll do the 091, since that's the VP's ID, and we'll view the report. And we need to make it Gary since that's who the reach manager is. And we'll come down here, period 2017-04, and we're going all the way down to operating margin, and we'll see the 23,182. And we can also cross-check, for example, revenue should be 995. Let's go back to the comparative report, run it for revenue. And I have the 995. So as you can see, all of this ties back to the crew P&L, even with the filter mode on. And always remember to use your % sign as a wildcard if you're not applying a filter like we have here. So that's about it from a functionality standpoint. Again, we got this under the crew to region P&L folder, comparative analytics, crew comparative analytics. You have the drill down here, the analytics margin summary. That's available to directly run, but it's probably easier just to run it right from the comparative analytics report. You're looking at a number, you want to get the details, you click on it and drill down and get your answers.